Welcome to the Successful Nonprofits Podcast. I'm your host, Dolph Goldenberg. Today, we're going to be chatting with Brad Wolff about how to solve the people problems in your organization. But before we do that, I am just so pleased to share my Strategic Planning Facilitator Cohort Group Initiative. It's a 28-week online program that will help one of your board members facilitate strategic planning within your organization. So through this 28-week program, they will learn each component of our proprietary process. And what's more, they will not only learn it, but then they will immediately turn around and start facilitating your organization's strategic plan. Now, I'll share more in the outro because I'm really excited about chatting with Brad Wolff today. Now, what I'm going to say next may sound like I'm bragging, and maybe I am just a little bit, but I curate my guests very, very carefully and stringently for this podcast. I regularly receive solicitations from publicists and sometimes people themselves who want to be on the podcast. And I'll tell you that I turn most of them down because I am committed to providing the absolute highest level of insight, utility, and value as a return on your investment of time. And equally important, I am committed to finding guests who are interesting people I want to talk to and people you want to talk to. You have a lot of demands on your time and your attention, and you deserve great guests. So while I get a lot of requests to be on the podcast, I also cold call potential guests that I think you would enjoy hearing. If there's a topic I want us to cover and a preeminent expert on that topic, well, I owe it to you to approach that person. Now, it's more work for me and for my podcast colleagues, Brianna and Caitlin, but let me tell you that it's worth it. So I pursued today's guest, Brad Wolff of PeopleMax. I sought him out after learning about his book, People Problems: How to Create People Solutions for a Competitive Advantage. So I was particularly taken by his assertion that all organizational problems are really just people problems. And not only did I say amen to that, but I reached out to him and said, Brad, I want you to be on the podcast. And he responded almost immediately and said, I'm flattered, but I don't know if this is going to be a good fit. I pretty much work with for-profit businesses and you're doing nonprofit stuff and, it might not be a great fit for your audience. So let me just say that once he did that, when you want something, you can't get it, you want it even more. So to say the least, I wanted it even more. So I convinced him that much like in the for-profit world, in the nonprofit sector, all problems are people problems too. And I assured Brad that we would absolutely benefit from his expertise if he agreed to be a guest. So, to say the least, while I feel lucky to introduce every single guest, I feel like I hit the jackpot by having Brad on today. Hey, Brad, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Dolph. I'm honored to be here.
I do have to share with you that most people, when I email them, they're either kind of a flat no or a really enthusiastic yes, but not something as diplomatic as what you gave me, but also made me really go, yeah, this guy gets it. I got to have him on the podcast.
I get it. I mean, that is human psychology. And I'm just upfront. I just want to make sure with anything that it's a win-win. If it's not a win-win, then there's just no point in it. So once you explain to me why I would be a guest that would add some value, then I was all for it. And I appreciate how you communicated that to me.
Like I said, I'm really thrilled to have you on. And I would love for us to maybe start the conversation. If you could share just a little bit with me about your origin story of PeopleMax.
Great point. So how far back do you want me to go? Birth?
Somewhere between birth and walking would be just fine.
Well, I was actually born a boy and grew up. And actually, interestingly, part of my origin story is, I grew up in a family. I was the fourth of four children. And it was a difficult childhood. All of us had definitely a challenging childhood with a lot of it wasn't an emotionally healthy, it was a dysfunctional family. Not that those are unusual. And I think that is part of the origin story that's important because I learned a lot of habits and how I thought, felt, and behaved that were actually ineffective and got in my way. So the personal challenges that I've had in communicating, connecting, getting clear on what I wanted, staying focused, bouncing, being persistent, gritty, learning and adjusting, managing my ego, all these things came from a backdrop of really struggling mightily in the beginning. So I think that really is a key part of my origin story. So I was very disconnected. When I went to college, all I knew is I wanted to get a degree and make a lot of money, et cetera, blah, 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 blah. And I was disconnected from really I wasn't internally focused. I was externally, I don't have any clue as to what to do. Let me get advice. I started off in engineering, realized I was going to study too much. And I was like, what's the point of being in college if I'm studying all the time? I'm just being real. So I decided to major in business, but I had no idea what area. So I got opinions and people said, accounting degree, that's the most marketable degree. You can always do something else. So I said, okay, accounting degree. Interestingly, I graduated with honors and passed my CPA exam shortly out of college. Now, the thing about what I did as an accountant, those elements of getting a degree and passing the CPA exam had to do with accounting theory and principles, had nothing to do with the practice of accounting. And there's an expression in accounting that accountants who are low in detail get fired. Those that are high in creativity go to jail. Now, I didn't go to jail, but I got fired a number of times before I realized, well, you know what? Maybe accounting's not the right field for me. So I went into sales, sold insurance and investments for 5 years, and then I went into recruiting. And that is really a key step because now I'm dealing with organizational results based on the people that they have. And in that 20 plus years, I saw so many situations of half the time the hires that companies make don't work out. And quite frankly, companies that brag about low turnover, often they shouldn't be bragging because they're just keeping people that are disengaged and doing a poor job at what they're doing. So I was able to see patterns in the connection between how the leaders thought and behaved and the results that they had. And I really started seeing clear patterns that leaders who were so convinced in buying their own message about that they were so good at judging character of people, so good at judging fit, so good at managing people would have such poor results. So that really got me fascinated with the topic of people are the whole key, and companies are doing it wrong more than they're doing it right.
So you said you really noticed that leaders within the companies or within the organizations kind of set a tone, and you could tell which ones were going to be effective at recruiting and managing and running the organization and which ones weren't. What types of things would you see that would kind of make you sort leaders out in that way?
Great question, Dolph. I would say a key thing, and it wasn't obvious to me at first, but it became obvious over the years, is how well that they were aware of and managed their ego. When the ego's driving, they're the expert, and their judgment is the right judgment. If it doesn't work out, it wasn't because of their judgment. Their command and control tendencies, that they're the boss, and if they don't agree, it's their way or the highway, led to turnover and a lot of bad decisions. But when a decision went wrong, it was always some other thing that had nothing to do with them. Well, my decision was right, but this happened. So I saw clearly the ego was the key element that drove a lot of success. And the most successful leaders were ones that were very open and I don't know, let's look at this situation and let's discuss it. Because at the end of the day, I don't have all the answers. I can always learn and get better. And that was a key element that taught me so much, is I'm the smartest, best equipped person, and that's why I'm the boss, versus I'm just a person that's in this position. How can I get better knowing that I'm flawed, I'm imperfect?
So really kind of leaders approaching it from that position of, okay, I don't know everything and I'm here to help figure it out.
That openness and humility, that at the end of the day, I'm just another human being with my, quote, strengths and weaknesses, and I make mistakes and I'm wrong. A lot of my beliefs are inaccurate and a lot of my assumptions are inaccurate. So how can I keep learning from that and teaming up with other people and listening to their viewpoints, because everyone has some value in well, not everyone, but everyone's viewpoint doesn't always have equal value, but other viewpoints of people that are qualified can have a lot of value. And my viewpoint alone is very dangerous. That's what I would say.
And you also mentioned, it's interesting, I not really thought about it this way. You also mentioned there's a lot of organizations that brag about how low their turnover is. But in reality, for some organizations, that just means that they have mediocre, even bad, poor employees that are sticking around too long.
Right. Often that just means that they're keeping people that aren't working out a long time instead of addressing the issue, and everyone's losing. So that can be a negative symbol. Everyone stays in the same job here for 30 years. They don't advance. They don't do anything else. And you talk to the people and they complain. All they do is talk about all the negative things. Well, why do you stay? Well, because of this pension, or because I've only got this many more years before I retired. Or there's always an excuse for why they tolerate a dysfunctional, unrewarding relationship.
I have to share with you the thing that drives me just absolutely berserk in the nonprofit sector. And it's what I refer to as promotion by seniority. So, someone comes in and they're a case manager and say on a 5-person team. And eventually they become the most senior case manager, and then when the supervisor leaves, there's just this expectation. Oh, well, I'm the most senior case manager. I should get the position, even though maybe the newest case manager is best qualified, or none of those case managers are well qualified to be the supervisor. But there's this expectation. And often then I think management just does not want to disappoint. And instead of having the tough conversation with the person and saying, well, here are the growth areas we'd need to see before we could really consider promoting you, and we'll help you work on that, but we need to bring someone else in to be the manager. They're like, okay, yeah, you can be the manager. And then they have an even bigger people problem.
That's a great point. Companies dangle promotions into management as a reward. And that's a danger, because it should not be as specifically a reward. It should be based on who's fit for that and wants the job, both. Because sometimes someone may be fit, but they just don't want the job. There's salespeople that would take a big pay cut, for example, to become a sales manager. It shouldn't be used as a reward.
The other thing that I also think we see a lot in the nonprofit sector, I'd be willing to bet it happens, for for-profits as well, is sometimes you take your highest performer and you make them a manager, but they're not really well suited to be a manager. And I mean, I'll be frank and say, I think as I've matured, I've certainly become a better manager. But, I was a really extraordinary grant writer in my first job. And so they made me a manager at like 24, 25 without probably the emotional maturity necessary to be a manager. And consequently, I was probably a pretty bad manager at the time.
Well, that's another very common mistake companies make, is if so-and-so's an excellent producer at something, then they're going to be a great manager. Actually, it often works the reverse, because someone that's outstanding producer at something or a technician at something, often they're focused on just getting the job done. And a manager's job is to get the job done through others, not through yourself. And their patience and expectations of other people that maybe have lesser skill or passion or talent or whatever often has a negative effect, because someone that only knows extreme success doesn't know what most people deal with in struggling to get better. So it actually, more often than not, is an earmark for someone that may not be as good a manager.
Right. Oh, absolutely. Without a doubt, I think individual performers, so if you function best as an army of one, probably don't function well as a manager.
Right. And if you look in sports, a lot of times the ones who were the star players fail as coaches, and the best coaches were mediocre or poor players. The halo effect is a big thing in human psychology. And we tend to, as human beings, these are general faults or flaws in human psychology that we're all vulnerable to. Human psychology applies to all of us. It isn't these other people, it's all of us. And if we see someone excel at something, the natural tendency for all of us is to attribute positive characteristics to things we know nothing about. The horn effect takes over too. If we see someone failing or performing poorly in something, we will tend to have negative predictions about other things that have nothing to do with it. Both of them, the fact that someone's good at X, that's all you can say is they're good at X. You cannot make any assumptions about Y, Z, or any other area just from knowing they're really good at X.
I am so glad that you reminded me and our listeners of that, because I think you're 100% right. So often we see someone who's bad at one or two things and we're like, oh, well, they can't do anything. And we write them off.
Right. The people that all of us could be top performers or fail depending on how well a job aligns with our innate core nature. So you can take any person and put them and to set them up to become a failure or a success based on that. None of us are inherently good or bad, a success or a failure. Those are myths.
Right. So we've unpacked some of that. Let's keep moving forward with your origin story.
Okay. So another big part of my origin story is just my own business failure. It was interesting. I was co-owner in a recruiting firm. We had 14 employees. We were growing. We were making really good money. My ego was puffed up. I mean, I thought, man, this is such an indicator of how smart I am, how capable I am, how well I manage people, how good I am at making decisions. I bought into this whole story about that. How well we were doing was because of these great traits on my end. And that was the fall of 2008. In January, we noticed a sudden reduction in hiring demand. And between March and September of 2009, we laid off all our employees. And then in December of 2009, we closed the company.
So literally in 12 months, you went from top of the world to don't have a company.
Yes. And I was distraught. I couldn't understand how in only 12 months I can go from feeling so confident that I had this highly successful business that was going to continue on in smooth sailing, nothing but growth, to literally being out of business, having no job, having a lot of debt, having a tremendous amount of self-doubt and feeling like a failure, having no clue as to what I'm going to do next. I mean, it was a dark, dark period. And it really helped instigate me questioning the assumptions that I had about my greatness, because other competitors hung in there and made it and did okay and then emerged stronger. So I couldn't, if everyone went out of business, I can use that as an excuse, but I couldn't do that. It was clear that that's not the case. It had something to do with me and the way I did things.
In social work, there's this concept of cognitive dissonance, which is when the way we perceive ourselves is different from the way other people perceive us. And it really sounds like cognitive dissonance was a bus that just ran right into you.
Right. And the thing that I'm grateful about, Dolph, I did not choose to explain it away with excuses about, well, they're doing well. They just happen to have some better clients, or that I could have come up. Here's the thing about excuses. They're infinite in the number we can come up with, and anyone will do. They don't even have to be good. Because we're like, yeah, okay, that's it. Yeah, that explains it. But I chose to say, let me not BS myself. This is a time to really be honest. And the truth is, I was inflexible. I was ego-driven. I made a lot of assumptions. I managed people with command and control when we disagreed. Well, clearly you don't know what you're talking about because I have a X number of years history of success. I mean, I did all those things that I'm talking about leaders that run into trouble did. So that was really helpful because not only did I notice these patterns in other people, but even more powerful was I chose to look myself in the mirror and say, that's me. So that was the clincher to the whole thing, was my recognition that I created my own failure because of not following the principles of success that I felt somehow I was above, or I'm the exception, or the ego tells us that. Yeah, but in my case, this is different, and here's why.
So after you recognized that, how did you reconcile it or recalibrate?
That's a great question. It's a process. It wasn't like I woke up one day and saw the light. I think a key part was it took me a while to realize, hey, I have a part in this. And just over the years, having some really good advisors, coaches, professional coaches and informal coaches, doing a lot of self-development work really was helpful. A lot of which is an ongoing thing is personal growth / development, and reading, attending different workshops, and realizing, wow, the problems I have are related to how I think and do things. They're not random. So fortunately, I was open that because I didn't want to keep repeating them. It was very clear. I'm going to keep repeating them if I don't change, because the world's not going to change to adapt to what I want. That I was always clear on. The world's not going to change for me. Fortunately, I knew that lesson, but I knew it, but I tested it a lot.
I also think you're so right that a lot of it just takes time and reflection to really kind of reconcile it. I've talked about it some on here, but I had just really a major career meltdown that, could potentially have been career ending. And it took me probably 5 years of processing it before I was at a place where I could fully acknowledge. I mean, I started off being able to acknowledge what some of my issues were, but really acknowledge, what role realistically I played in that meltdown, and, what I need to do to avoid meltdowns like that. But it really took 5 years before I could publicly and openly talk about it.
Yes. And I think there's a lot of myths out there. And one of the myths out there is that we should learn a lot quicker than we do. The truth is the smartest people you'll ever meet are extremely slow learners when it really comes down to it. I'm just a dreadfully snail-paced learner when it comes to a lot of these life lessons. I mean, I'm like, are you kidding me? It takes me that long to learn these things? I mean, it's now a point of humor.
So, Brad, I have to tell you, I've been hit by a car 3 times. And I don't mean 3 car accidents. I, as a human being, have been hit by a car 3 times. I am definitely a slow learner.
Or you're a car magnet. It could be that too.
Well, well, there comes a point in life, and I was much, much younger than I am now, when you just have to accept the law of velocity and mass, and you just have to accept, hey, even if you got the right of way, sometimes it's better to stay where you are and not get hit.
Well, can I be assured that you're not a ghost, that this is really a physical form that's alive still? I mean,
well, so it's funny. My Skype camera is doing something funky, so I think I'm a little shaded right now. But I can assure you, I'm definitely not a ghost.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure after getting hit by a car 3 times, you must feel like you're pretty lucky if you've been hit 3 times and you seem like, I don't see any missing limbs. I don't see there's no obvious signs of brain damage.
Well, so I have to tell you, 2 of them were scrapes. Only one of them hospitalized me, but 2 of them were really just more scrapes than, after the one that hospitalized me, I was a little more cautious, and then I just got scrapes. But now again, at some point in your life, you're like, okay, I've learned my lesson. It's a lot bigger than me, and I'm not going to force it.
Right. So a lot of the life lessons that seem obvious now, it's amazing they're not obvious when you're going through them, because the ego is the thing that tricks us. I don't consider the ego bad. It's just there, and it's a deterrent to our growth. That's why we need to always watch it and be aware of it, because my ego didn't go away. My ego will tell me these grand things about myself and want to tell me how confident I'm 100% sure this is the right decision. And nonsense. It's just, and the thing is, the good news, all humans are designed the same. We come equipped with the same physical and psychological makeup. The human design manual is the same for everyone, regardless of race, religion, gender, blah, blah, blah. It's the same manual. That's the good news, is because once we learn the manual, we can start now making some real progress.
So with those people problems in our organizations, how do we go about making some progress?
That's a very broad question. Can you narrow it down a little bit more specific? Because I can start in so many areas with that.
And that's fair, because I know our time is limited today. So for example, you've talked about how when we bring too much ego with us to our organization, it trips us up and it trips other people up. So maybe if we start there, I mean, if we think about that as one of the key people problems we might see in an organization, how do we help people troubleshoot that problem?
Let me back up, because your question, as I think about it now, because I was like, where do I start? Is actually a good question. So I don't know if you can delete that minute or whatever.
If you don't mind, I just love to leave that in and, let listeners kind of see us running around the circle for a minute.
Process, I say something and I realize, you know what, now that I think about it, yeah, that is a real process of being human. You take a path and then I reflected and I realized that's actually a good question. I was looking more to narrow it and get specific, but that's a good question. So yeah, let's leave it in there.
Great.
That the real life is not clean and rehearsed and everything is just, where you're going. You take a path and then you go, I just tripped. Let me just back up and realize that I tripped. So I think the key is to realize, number one, all problems are people problems at their root. The traditional view is we've got processes, technology, and people are the three components that make an organization. And we tend to separate it, but they're really not separate. And what I mean by that is humans design the processes, operate the processes, fail to adjust and fix the processes. So the processes are all human-based. And if you have the right process but the wrong people that aren't doing it right, the process doesn't work. Same exact thing with technology. So behind every process and technology problems are people problems. That's the root cause. So when we're trying to fix technology problems and process problems by addressing the process and technology, we're missing the root cause. We're treating the symptoms because the symptoms are the things that we see. We don't see root causes directly in most cases. So at the end of the day, there isn't a problem you can have out there that at its root isn't a people problem. So you start with the recognition that there is no cause or solution that's not people-based. So stop trying to fix everything with I'm going to bring in the right process and all that. It's great for consultants and everything that I'm going to fix the process without having to address first the root cause, which is how people think, feel, and do things. So I think that's number one. Second thing is to realize that the leaders, everything starts with the leaders. As leaders, the natural thing as human beings is we want to point fingers and, this person isn't doing this and that person isn't doing that and blah, 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 and kind of divorce ourselves as if we're separate from the problem. The truth is the leader is part of it. Because at the end of the day, the leader hired the person. The leader is involved with making sure they're doing the job right, setting direction, addressing problems, keeping the person in the same role versus another role. At the end of the day, there isn't any problem with a subordinate that doesn't at its root have to do with the leader. Plus, as a leader, if I'm a leader in an organization, the only one I have any control over that I can impact directly is myself. So it's always the leader starting with themselves. And that's number one. It starts with me as a leader. The second thing is, it isn't what I say, it's what I do. If I'm going to say anything, well, you need to listen first and understand what someone's saying before interrupting or responding and really understand what they're saying. If I'm not doing the same thing, I'm making it worse. I'm better off saying nothing and just violating my own advice. So if I'm not walking the talk, I'm better off just being silent because at least I'm not a hypocrite then. I'm just ineffective.
I could not agree with you more. It's like, if you're in the nonprofit sector, if you're the executive director, you show up late every day by 25 or 30 minutes, and then you complain people are late or people are late to meetings or whatever. Well, you've set the tone. You've said, well, if you waltz in here at, 8:30 instead of 8, it's okay. Right.
And look, I'm not here to lambaste leaders. A leader is just another human being that happens to be in a position of authority that has a greater influence over the culture than someone else. But a leader at the end of the day is just another human being with we all have our own things that we're better at than others. And we have our personal development path, which is the things that are helping us and the things that are getting in our way. The key thing I think is our professional success in anything is based on our own personal development. They're one and the same thing. We are the only tool we have, and we take ourselves everywhere we go. There is no other tool. Our ability to impact, our ability to make decisions, our ability to deal with difficult situations is 100% related to our own personal development. How aware we are, self-aware we are, how well we manage our egos, how focused and committed we are to take action on what we need to do rather than put it off and make excuses. These are all personal development issues. That's the only work we can ever really truly do. Our business life is just a tool for our personal development, and we're never going to go further than our personal development allows us.
Absolutely could not agree more. And I've always thought of this almost as a toolbox. I know you said, that it's our tool, but I've always kind of thought of this as a toolbox. And everywhere I go, I put new skills and abilities and competencies in my toolbox. And that's also why I said, when I was 24, 25 and was a first time manager, I probably didn't have the maturity. My toolbox did not have enough tools in it for me to lead a department. But over time you get more tools in the box and you're like, hey, wait, I've seen this before. Let me pull, I really need a plumber's wrench for this.
Exactly. And that's there's a lot of myths out there that I think distract us away from those truths. And one of them is the talent myth. You either innately have some talent or you don't. And if you do, you're going to succeed because of your talent. And if you don't, you're not going to succeed regardless of what you do. That's been debunked time and time again, that if you have a great talent, you've developed that talent. If you inherited the ultimate talent in the world in something, if you don't put in the work and keep getting better, that talent is never going to be realized. And that takes time and repetition. You've heard of the 10,000 hour rule. That's based on research that people become masters in anything. There's no shortcut to it. It's usually going to be about 10 years of continuous get in there and make the effort, fail, fall, learn from it and get better, have struggles and question whether or not you can do it, and all these other things. The hero's journey is a journey of a lot of falling and doubts and emotional difficulty.
I forgot which comedian said it, but some comedian said, I was an overnight success after doing stand-up in dirty bars for 20 years. Everyone's like, oh my gosh, this person did it overnight, when in fact they've been working on it for a decade or 2 decades.
That's one of the myths that I think hold us back a lot and that hits cultures, because then we have a culture that you've got to always do the right thing, make the right decision, take the right action, or you're punished. Growth happens in an environment where people feel safe. All the research psychologically is very clear. One of the most important things a leader can do is to set up a safe environment for people to be authentic, acknowledge their difficulties and their weaknesses, and openly work on it with support and encouragement and feedback. You're never going to get it unless you do that. And that means that the leader openly acknowledges weaknesses and openly shows a commitment to work on them and encourages honest feedback from others related to it. The culture of an organization is created by the leaders. If the leaders are complaining about the toxic culture, they created it.
They should look in the mirror if they complain about toxic culture. Could not agree more. Brad, I have loved having you on, and I'm not letting you go until I ask you the off-the-map question. Every guest gets asked an off-the-map question, and it is typically something that has nothing to do with the topic of the show. But today's might actually kind of slide into the theme of the show, because I wanted to ask you, what are your daily habits, and how do they impact your life?
You couldn't have asked me a better question that's on the map. Your off-the-map question was completely on the map.
I know, it's a fail. I failed. See, I can own it when I fail. Okay.
Do you see this book?
Oh, now I do. The Power of Habits. Yeah.
I'm a certified coach. I do a lot of leadership and executive coaching. This is the essence right here, the word habit. And I write about it, speak about it. That's the essence. The habit is the structure that allows your whatever you want to do to be effective. That's one of the big problems is I want to do this, I want to do that. Until you build the habit is the thing that makes it sustainable and real. So whatever experiences we're having in life, directly pertains to our habits of how we think and feel and behave. And it's habitual. It is very rarely we getting off the habit track and just completely just making a thought through aware decision that isn't based on our habits.
Right. So you started off by really personalizing it. So I'd love for you to personalize this as well. What are your daily habits?
Okay. It starts in the morning. I get up at 7. I'm not an extremely early riser. Get a cup of coffee. And this is a daily habit. Meditate, visualize, do praying. Then I do 20 minutes of yoga. Then I go to work. I sit down. I do a visualization of what's my vision of what's important to me, and then I map out my day. And everything I do is based on what are the big rocks, the big key goals that are important to me, and does it support it? So I make my priorities, and I even use a habit technology software that sends me reminders and things like that, because habits are all about building the brain wiring from repetition and developing a positive association because you're having success in what you're doing, which takes continuous effort. So I have key habit areas where I'm struggling that I put my focus on. And right now, my big thing, and I've gotten so much better on it, is to stay focused on the task I'm on without distracting away onto something else. That's a big one for me personally.
Yeah, and I think in this day and age where we have a phone and a computer that's dinging us, both of them at the same time, all the time, that's tough because we really find ourselves chasing the monkey of whatever's going across the screen.
Yes. And it's a process because I'm tempted. Just by sheer habit, I stay focused a lot better now, and I'll get out of email. I won't get on the internet for a while. If I have an idea, I'll just write it down real quick so I don't lose it, rather than chasing after it. And it's just a process and commitment. Then I reflect. Experience isn't what makes us smarter. Experience that's reflected on with adjustments based on a reflection makes us smarter. Experience without reflection doesn't do a whole lot to make us smarter.
Mm-hmm. So I want to ask you one last question. You mentioned you're currently using a tech or an app to help remind you and reinforce your habits. What app or tech is that?
I use something, and I'm a reseller because of it. It's through a company called Habit Technologies, and it's a way of personalizing the things you want to work on and setting up very specifically what it is you want to do, what your goal is, what behavior you're going to make, and set up reminders for it. And then at the end of the day, reflect on how you did with it. And just through sheer repetition, you develop the routine, because it's about routines. A habit is a routine. And the nice thing is that habit then makes it easy, because if it's a routine, it's not hard to get on the phone and make 20 calls that you know you need to make, or to sit down and do this busy work that you really don't like to do, or whatever. If you do it all the time and it becomes a habit, you're like, oh, okay. I would say the single biggest key to putting whatever good intentions we have into action is to build the habit. Until we build the habit, it's not sustainable. It's likely not to be continued on.
Very cool. So, Brad, if folks want more information on Habit Technologies, can they get that at your website, or where do they get that?
I would say email me directly at BWOLFF, that's 2 F's as in Frank, at PeopleMaximizers.com. That's bwolf at peoplemaximizers.com. The next time I'm on, I'll give the story on why it's such a long email, but I think we've run out of time.
My email addresses are like Dolph at Successful Nonprofits and Dolph at Goldenberg Group, and they don't fit on any form. They're too long. But Brad, I am so glad you've agreed to speak with me today. I got so much value out of this. I am sure that our listeners did as well. Now, I want to make sure that our listeners know that you have generously offered a free ebook at your website, and the ebook's title is Maximize Your People, Productivity, and Profit. And they can download it by visiting peoplemaximizers.com/maximize-profits. And of course, listeners, we're going to link that in the show notes. So if for any reason you try to put it in and it does not work, go to our show notes. You can also buy Brad's best-selling book, People Problems, How to Create People Solutions for a Competitive Advantage. And you can buy that on Amazon or at your independent bricks and mortar bookseller. It's a great read, and I'd suggest you pick it up. And let me just say that if today's show piqued your interest, make sure you mosey on over to Brad's website, peoplemaximizers.com. Hey, Brad, thank you again for being on today.
Thank you, Dolph.
Were you trying to help the people problem in your office get their necktie out of the shredder while I was sharing the link to Brad's free ebook? Don't worry about it. Go ahead and finish helping that person get free from the shredder. We've got the hookup at successfulnonprofits.com. You can just go there, and I promise you all the links you need will be right there. Now, in my intro, I also mentioned that we're going to be conducting a strategic planning facilitator cohort group. And some of the procedures that I just wanted to share with you, we're going to help participants really learn how to interview stakeholders and train other folks within your organization how to interview stakeholders, on how to conduct a thorough environmental scan, review the organization's mission, vision, core values. I just want to remind folks the cohort group's going to start on May 6th. And there are some deadlines, and there's also some points at which the price goes up. I think by the time this is released, the investment's going to be $3,500. But for podcast listeners only, which means when you call to see if you're appropriate, you've got to say that you heard about this on the podcast. We will give you a $600 discount. So go to successfulnonprofits.com if you want to find out more. Listeners, that's our show for the week. I hope you have gained some insight to help your nonprofit thrive in a competitive environment.